the most gripping, real-life chronicles of leadership, loyalty, treachery, and salvation, from modern-day Africa. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe, tap like, and share, because what you're about to hear isn't just a tale of politics, it's a shift in the nation's soul. Let's begin with part 1, the Phantom General. They whispered his name, the Falcon, not for flying above the mess, but for hunting within it. He never overlooked a flaw, never hesitated at the sight of blood, never wavered under pressure. General Mahamadou Zango was a man carved from battlefield steel, shaped by backroom deals, and seasoned in the smoke of war and secrecy. Under the old regime, he was the iron behind soft smiles, silencing rebellion, executing black ops, and dancing in corridors, where power moved in whispers. But when that order collapsed, and Captain Ibrahim Traoré emerged, not with gold, but with fire in his words, demanding honor, freedom, and rebirth, Zango didn't see a future. He saw a threat. "He'll tear down the house," Zango muttered to his loyal few, "and bury us in the rubble." From the start, they were opposites. Traoré wanted truth, counsels, equality. Zango believed in chains, because chains, to him, meant order, and order meant survival. So Zango waited, watched, and when Traoré stood tall, beloved, untouchable, he moved. First came the rumors, supplies rerouted, transmissions disrupted, intel buried, then foreign headlines shaped a new story. Traoré unstable, unfit, dangerous. Zango convened secret war rooms, under the banner of national defense, drawing loyalists from distant outposts, reassigning forces with coded memos. The plan was flawless. A dawn strike, timed for 0300 hours, during a standard visit to a remote northern base. The idea: arrest him quietly, forge confessions, announce a restoration to disciplined command. But what Zango misjudged, what no war manual could predict, was how deep Traoré's roots ran. That morning, a junior signal officer, Idrissa, spotted something off: a delay in timestamps, a corrupted hash in the encrypted orders. He sent an alert through a forgotten direct line, monitored only by the inner circle. At 1:44, Traoré read the message. He didn't panic. He rose, put on his jacket, and walked into the desert dark. What happened next is disputed. Some say he went alone to Zango's camp. Others claim he met each unit leader face to face and reminded them, "We didn't fight for gold. We fought for the people." What is certain, at 0300, when Zango ordered Operation Dawn Reclaim, 2/3 of his forces stayed silent. The rest descended into chaos. And at 3:17, Traoré walked into the command post, not bound, but in command. Zango stood frozen. His hands shook, his expression unreadable. Traoré said nothing at first. He looked at him, not with vengeance, but with the gaze of a man who'd seen too many graves. "You could have had me killed," Traoré finally said, "but you would have buried the country too." Zango lowered his eyes. "I thought you'd destroy it all," he whispered. "Everything we built. Only the lies." Traoré replied, "I need fighters, not shadows. And I need you to choose." That night, there were no trials, no televised downfall. Traoré returned to the capital, as if nothing had happened. Zango disappeared. Exile? Prison? Dead? 6 months later, he resurfaced, on the edge of a military academy, training cadets in strategy, logistics, and, unexpectedly, loyalty. When asked why Zango was spared, Traoré simply said, "Some weapons sharpen after they break." And so began a new era, an era where the Falcon did not fly against the wind, but beside it. Still tension lingered. Soldiers prayed with one hand, near the trigger. Trust, between two men, who should have died in the same tent, was fragile. but survival has its own language. And in the war room, as the sun rose, Traoré and now retitled advisor Sandkwama began redrawing their maps, not of terrain, but of betrayal. Their first question, who else knew? And with steady breath, Sand laid it out, a confession not of weakness, but clarity, names, codes, meetings disguised as aid programs, wire trails to accounts in Dar and Dubai, traitors in uniform, ghosts in retirement, men who couldn't accept, a leader who bled, under the sun, with his soldiers. Traoré listened, not with outrage, but with the chill of a man writing the last page of a long, tragic book. No revenge. Not yet, because this was war, in the shadows, and shadow wars are won with precision, not purges. So began Operation Ember, inspired by the ancient West African belief, power born from quiet resolve. No executions. Instead, promotions. Young, loyal officers, with roots in local villages, were raised up, bypassing the corrupt ladder. Old lions were reassigned to ceremonial posts, far from their dens. And through it all, Traoré tested Sand, sending him into former strongholds, to preach unity, reform, and a new doctrine, not as a gesture of peace, but as a constant question. Are you still with me? The People's Army, and Sand among them, obeyed with a loyalty that even he couldn't fully explain. Perhaps because in the wreckage of his former pride as a soldier, he no longer saw Ibrahim as just an idealist, but as the most dangerous type of revolutionary, one who waits. As they quietly reshaped the power structure from within, a new peril stirred, not from generals or embassies, but from a frightened elite whose wealth relied on digging gold and burying truth. Their deals were now under scrutiny, their hired guards outnumbered by rural organizers with machetes and walkie-talkies. The uprising wasn't chaos, it was strategy. Villages began sending formal declarations to the capital, demanding justice, transparency, and an end to what they called stealth colonialism. Foreign intelligence took notice. In classified intercepts, French operatives were found reactivating dormant contacts. Messages emerged from desert outposts promising money to ex-warlords if they could sabotage infrastructure and rail lines. Ibrahim, aware the next attempt on his life would come not from palace walls but fractured borderlands, turned once again to Sand, not as a spared traitor, but a man who once navigated the underworld of military disorder. If you seek redemption, he told him, cut off their funding, burn every line. So Sand, now loyal only to this war of rebirth, formed a covert task force of former enemies. Snipers, signal hackers, ghost agents, men marked by past sins but sharpened by experience. In 6 weeks, they tore through the financial arteries behind the subversion, seizing crypto wallets, freezing hidden assets, and intercepting supply drones headed to rebel camps. Meanwhile, Ibrahim said nothing publicly. He made no speeches about the failed coup. He appeared only once, to open a new hospital, constructed not by private firms but by military engineers under his reform orders. The people, who now sensed how close they'd come to collapse, didn't panic. Instead, their resolve deepened. They saw in Ibrahim not a man celebrating victory but one who quietly rebuilt after every storm. And in Sand, watched with suspicion but tolerated, they saw something even rarer than loyalty, transformation. But both knew the fight was far from finished. In Burkina Faso, power was never about positions, it was about the soul of its institutions. In the pause before the next blow, they didn't prepare with shows or slogans, but with silence, plans, and a shared understanding. History records not just victors, but the means of their triumphs. The dawn over Ouagadougou bled orange-red, streaking the horizon like a warning. Inside the presidential war chamber, Ibrahim Traoré studied a massive wall map, speckled with red pins, each marking not only a threat but old alliances turned toxic. Foreign-run logistics hubs masked as humanitarian outposts and media nodes spreading the narrative that Burkina Faso was becoming a dictatorship, while claiming to guard democracy. His finger traced a supply route that curved through Sil province toward the east. He paused on a heavily marked Campina, a forgotten town near Togo's border where weeks earlier, Seized arms shipments had been rerouted to mercenaries funded through shell companies tied to Belgian and French energy firms. Turning to Sand, the ex-assassin turned tactician, there was no residue of betrayal in the air, only the sharp stillness between men who understood that survival was now national, not personal. Sand, who once plotted to kill this man, now gave briefings like a seasoned commander, showing satellite feeds, density maps, and intel on a vicious rogue outfit called Les You Do Desert, the Eyes of the Desert. Elusive and feared, they reportedly answered not to generals, but to a remote algorithm running from a Marseille-based intel cell. They want us to come in with tanks, Ibrahim said. Bleed our morale. Sand offered another way. A precision strike not on fighters but on the narrative. A week-long covert mission placing undercover documentary crews on the fringes of Kenya, filming evidence of foreign sabotage. Alongside this, a humanitarian mission, led not by troops, but by elders and civil engineers, shielded quietly by elite guards disguised as aid workers. It wasn't just a tactical answer, it was a story weaponized. When footage leaked of European weapons buried alongside UN-branded food parcels, the firestorm was immediate. From African Union halls to university rallies in Dakar and Nairobi, outrage erupted. Western denials rang hollow. Burkina Faso citizens had seen enough. For the first time since Sankara's ghost was invoked in their streets, unity formed, not of slogans but of common sight. Their autonomy was under siege, not with tanks but through agreements, banks, and masked partnerships. In the weeks that followed, Ibrahim and Sand moved with synchronized purpose. One building new structures, the other sweeping out decay. Both braced for the inevitable next clash, certain it would strike harder. Because power long shielded by silence never yields to dignity without violence. And as expected, the next front came not with bullets, but with currency. The freezing of assets and blocking of elite pipelines triggered the storm. Through their offshore holdings, they engineered a crisis. A financial infection spread, contracts nullified, credit systems sabotaged, and inflation ignited in a deliberate surge designed to trigger chaos at home. As the markets buckled and headlines whispered of looming collapse, Ibrahim made an unexpected move. He invited the nation to a public forum on the palace grounds. No armored glass. No ceremonial guards. Just him, alone, facing the people. Angry merchants, anxious farmers, and young idealists. They didn't ask for promises. They demanded truth. And he gave it to them, not cloaked in technical jargon, but in the raw voice of a soldier who had become a statesman. Yes, they're targeting us because we chose not to be owned. The response was not thunderous applause, but a stunned silence more profound than cheers. That same night, a leak came through. Someone had placed a price on Ibrahim's head. The contractor was no ordinary player but a foreign military firm disguised as a supply chain outfit. Without hesitation, it was Sanda who offered to infiltrate. She changed into civilian clothes and caught a midnight bus to a frontier town, where an old contact, a former mercenary, waited. In a dim, sweat-stained cafe, surrounded by swarming flies, she confirmed the worst. The assassination was real. A stealth team planned to infiltrate during a scheduled blackout to not only eliminate Ibrahim, but to seize the encrypted National Archives, evidence he had begun collecting on years of looted resources, doctored debts, and secret bribes that painted the struggle for freedom as lunacy. Returning under cover in the back of a produced truck, Sanda didn't wait for formal authorization. She summoned a unit of loyalists, ex-insurgents turned patriots, and intercepted the strike team barely 14 minutes before they reached the perimeter. A silent skirmish unfolded in the dark alleys around the compound as Ibrahim sat in a flickering room, answering students' questions about currency reform and the vision of a Burkina Faso free from inherited colonial shackles. By sunrise, the bloodied bodies lay under tarp. The official statement spoke of an unknown threat neutralized, but those close to Ibrahim knew the truth. And in their eyes, Sanda hadn't just earned pardon, he'd earned belonging. That same week, Ibrahim created a new position from thin air senior advisor on military ethics, and publicly named Sanda to it. Critics called it political suicide, lunacy, a betrayal of governance. But during his next speech, Ibrahim offered a single reply: the most dangerous men are the ones who've seen the damage they almost caused. And while pundits barked and press swirled, the people understood. In a fragile nation stitching itself back together, it wasn't flawlessness they needed, but evidence of growth. That night, under the weighted stillness of Ouagadougou's sky, which trembled not from calm but from the nearness of transformation, two figures stood beneath the presidential compound, in a bunker lit by a faint red map. One was the intended target, the other once the potential assassin. As Sonda shifted the markers to reveal remaining garrisons suspected of foreign influence, Ibrahim watched, not with doubt, but with a quiet certainty that Burkina Faso's future didn't depend on raw power, but on who had tasted poison and survived it changed. And it was then that Sonda said something that Ibrahim would never forget. If betrayal taught me anything, it's that fear should never be the price of loyalty. From those words, a doctrine took root, not in weapons or flags, but in trust slowly built. Across the military, Ibrahim dismantled rigid hierarchies and replaced them with circles of integrity, rotating leadership, communal decision-making, and full transparency in civilian dealings. Foreign analysts sneered at what they deemed utopian decentralization. But in practice, things shifted. Desertions dropped, bribery faded, and communities that once trembled at the sight of soldiers began to share meals and vital information voluntarily. In villages that had once spat at the name of Ouagadougou, murals now appeared, of a soldier leaning down, shaking the hand of a child. Graffiti once marked by skulls and fire was now replaced by steady hands and purpose. Sonda, who had quietly become the driving force behind the sweeping changes, drifted through the reforms like a shadow, not seeking forgiveness, only results. He interviewed cadets to understand their motivations, verified complaints from elders, and dissected procurement trails to eliminate phantom expenses left behind by decades of rot. In doing so, he transformed into something no one anticipated, the moral compass of the military. And though some high-ranking officers were quietly uneasy, none dared challenge him. They understood that Ibrahim's rise had reshaped the battlefield. It was no longer about climbing power structures, it was about dismantling them so no tyrant could ever climb again. Yet, just as stability began to take root at home, outside forces mounted a different kind of assault. A leaked report from a European security alliance revealed planned sanctions, not only against Burkina Faso's government, but also its local farming groups, solar tech startups, and even independent media. It was a declaration of war, not against a regime, but against a radical idea, that an African nation could chart its own destiny without external approval. Faced with these revelations during a continent-wide town hall, Ibrahim remained calm. He didn't rally anger, he called for endurance. "They want to see us on our knees with empty bowls," he said. "Let's show them we've learned to feed ourselves." His words sparked a wave of action. People began converting old colonial warehouses into granaries, reviving abandoned factories into textile hubs. Within months, local production surged, not by state order, but by the sheer will of the people. Sonda watched it all, struck by the surreal weight of his role. Not as the man who saved the president, nor as the one who once sought to kill him, but as proof that even the most broken parts can be rebuilt when a nation believes not in a leader, but in a cause. And then came the real test, not bullets or bombs but secrets. One of Ibrahim's oldest allies, a founding member of the Transitional Council, was caught leaking information to a private intelligence agency in Luxembourg. The breach sent shockwaves through the government. If treachery still lurked that close to the center, what had all the sacrifice been for? It was Sonda, not Ibrahim, who asked to confront the traitor. In a dim, silent room, he posed a single question. "When did you stop believing?" The man said nothing. He simply lowered his head. Later, when Ibrahim asked what he saw, Sonda replied, "Not a villain, just a man who couldn't see a future where we win." From that moment, Ibrahim issued a new code, not a formal decree, but a shared whisper across the ranks. To survive, we must build not just strategies but imagination. Because in the fight for freedom, bullets fade but belief endures. And so it was, at the end of that week, beneath the same baobab where he had once pledged to serve or die, Ibrahim stood again. This time, beside him was the man who had once tried to end his life. They didn't speak. They simply watched as children played with hand-carved wooden rifles, laughing, mimicking guards protecting a land they would one day inherit. Not from rulers, but from dreamers who reshaped the rules. The story that began with a hidden knife ended in daylight. Not with revenge, but with redemption. Where power had once meant fear and submission, it now meant trust and participation. Ibrahim Traoré, a man who could have ruled with wrath after surviving betrayal, chose a different legacy. One built on humility, unity, and teaching even his enemies to believe again. The general who once aimed to kill him became his protector. The people who once doubted him now sang his name, not from duty, but from pride. Burkina Faso did not transform because one man dodged a bullet. It transformed because that man refused to become the monster the bullet was meant to create. This is not just a story of vigilance, it is a story of vision. In a continent too often spoken over, here stood a leader who listened. In a world obsessed with control, he chose conviction. Thank you for watching this powerful account on the voice of Ibrahim Traoré. If you believe in a stronger, freer Africa, led by vision, not violence, please subscribe, like, and share this story. Together we rise. If you followed this story and dream of a future where African nations speak for themselves, stand tall, and reclaim their narrative, join us. Subscribe to the voice of Ibrahim Traoré and be part of a growing movement grounded in truth, dignity, and independence. This is not the end. This is where it truly begins.